The dominance of machismo and right-wing alt pipeline shaped a generation of young men thinking it is acceptable to be racist because it is treated as funny, to degrade women because that is actually what the dominant culture rewards, and to idolize figures like Andrew Tate, Jordan Peterson, and Sneeko, who each helped push misogyny, racial resentment, and broader monosphere politics further into the mainstream because of machismo. This is the comparative that they never chased for in their side of the house. The opposition case simply asks you to look at the alternative because PM never built the likely counterfactual, which is the comparison between dominant machismo versus dominant opaqueness that fails that. And our answer to that is that performative male archetype rose precisely because it began to displace the perverse culture who will remain dominant absent the countervailing force who will remain on the mainstream and not on the extreme in their side. This is my early flag out with their soft counterfactual that in their world, people who bite into liberal mainstream ideologies are going to be pure, and this makes a sustainable impact. Government build markers to sincerity on the lifeline of social reality. They want a man who is pure in motive, perfectly authentic, and internally enlightened before his behavior can account for anything. But at no point do they explain why that social standard is necessary or desirable. At no point do they explain why a norm must originate in an inner conviction rather than repeated conduct, or why an ideal should be so rigid that most men cannot enter it from the beginning. Their case is built on fantasy that better worlds are produced by perfect men rather than better incentives to create those perfect men, even if you are not perfect at all. First issue then, whether or not this debate should be judged by net sincerity of the men or rather than the social effects of the performance he is forced to sustain. Goff is two-pronged under this. One, that they will live in patriarchy. That's why oftentimes this leads to the same ground because all of these efforts are phony. Two, that you will never have your own identity because this manufactured social expectations in the status quo create social manufactured benefit. Two clarifications before anything else. First, the comparative in this debate was never between the performative male and some fully sincere feminist mature men who would have existed and lead these chambers anyway in both worlds. The comparative is between this archetype and the older mainstream it displaces, the machismo, this mockery of softness, and the idea that masculine is something that should be, unaccountable in the first place because that's the nature of men. Second, the question is the debate is not whether some men are faking it. The question is whether the popularization of this performance changes what masculinity is socially rewarded for that. That is the comparative that they never answer. Let's first talk about why our world is far better at reshaping masculine norms. Their claim is that unless men are authentic, none of the benefits in our side are real. That's why it's easier to just get those authentic men to be pandered for in their side because we're not going to harm their image. But they never answer why sincerity is the condition for change at all. I think Joseph was very clear here, just like what Sarv also pointed out, that social norms do not spread because everyone wakes up morally transformed, especially in your formative years. Like, what does it mean for a young man chasing for every social norms that they should look up into? They spread because people imitate what is rewarded, we repeat it, and build institutions and expectations around it. That is true, for example, for professionalism, courtesy, and even morality, for instance. Next, this also affects the expectation of other genders with men. Because when we oftentimes create germane understanding that we should not dive with a static, disappointing characterization, we do create the better outcomes and expectation for them, even if the archetype or the population of the archetype right now are insincere, for example, the expectations still remain. I think in their world where the bare minimum men it would be forwarded are actually those specific people that can also be a machismo. It's just that they are less rigid. That's why they're more acceptable, which is still bad if you weigh in the margin of change. That's why lesser expectation often leads to an active call out for change. The narrative that, well, he is a man, that's why he will do this, it's within their nature, will always remain in their side. That's why when we said that women will expect more, that's good because now they have the board to do so. They know that there's a diverse array of people to choose into and not just jump into a narrative like, let's just chase a rich man because that's the only way for a man to be useful. Gov is so disattached from the patriarchal reality that we have faced back then, absent the popularity of this, and why the extremes are actually that they pointed out are actually the baseline standard of people back then. So even if they can create some distrust in these moments that it fails, I don't think they will be irrational to point out indifferences and not know that multiple actors exist. The difference is on our ability to create those fears for them. Sure, I'll take the POI.
What happens when, why is this archetype like fundamentally timeless? What happens if there's social media trends change in 10 months and like suddenly something else is popular? Will these men still stick around to feminism?
Literally, if you bite into the liberal mainstream, you will bite into the liberal mainstream because that's the expectation that you have built forward. Like in your side, it's easy for people to just simply say that, aha, these cultures of dominant culture will still exist. You will still be racist, blah, blah, blah. Because those genuine men that you have pointed out and those liberal men in your side, you know what's going to happen with them? They're going to be blasted out by those dominant machismo that will actually mock them whenever they point out change. In our side, we create the landscape in order for them to survive. Secondly, in our world, men learn very quickly that if they want social approval, desirability, and this also answers the POI, by the way, even just to avoid looking bad, they have to look respectful and speak in language of consent and distance themselves from overt misogyny, for example. That matters because if the first step is opportunistic, as to what they have claimed, the performance only works if it is sustained, as what Joseph pointed out. You do not get the benefits of seeing safe, seeing as a feminist, or being emotionally intelligent from a one-off gesture. You only get them when the conduct is maintained across over time. This is where we flip their claim. Government says performance is dangerous because it can create insincere expectation and it leads to social distrust. No, performance is precisely what makes the norm durable because once men realize that the reward only lasts so long as the behavior lasts, they are forced to keep doing it. The moment that they drop these actions, they lose the very social rewards they're chasing for. That's why they research and keep indulging within these beliefs, even if it started as a sham. We keep them within the spheres in our side. So the issue is not the performative, it is the performance that it brings that are shaped by, or that also shapes spectrums and allow them to diversify and in the popularization of it is actually net benefit. The performance in itself becomes a long-term discipline and produces norms and expectation that the world entrenches. In our world, all of those men can still be pulled into a better behavior because the archetype is easy to copy and easy to internalize. In their world, you have to be already be a finished product before you're allowed to count. And the problem is you still have to face those machismo, for example, to counter and pander for them. The problem is, as a man, in the spectrum of men, you get lesser support because lesser men are pulled in within your movement. That means fewer men, fewer norms, and and all of those old masculine traps survive by default in your side. In their world, it's easy for people to say that, no, Gabe Pineda is really one of the good ones. He really believes, he really means it. That is precisely how abuse gets excused. In our world, you do not get to hide behind the claim that you are internally enlightened. You are judged whether you continue to enact the behavior that you publicly perform.